I'm Matt Carmichael, editor of What the Future, and your host, as always. This episode is about indulgence, so it's part vice and part luxury. We're going to lead with the vice part, but weave in the luxury as well. But I want you to know the great lengths, dear viewer, that I go to present this material as authentically as possible. So in the spirit of this issue, I went a little method with the preparation, and I indulged as I worked on the script with a traditional cocktail in a luxury hotel lobby, replete with fireplaces and exquisite handcrafted woodwork, yet also with the modern vibe of a Gen Z co-working space. The service and beverages were impeccable. The cocktail was a little bitter, just like your host. Anyway, as we did with the American Dream issue, we realized we needed to have some definition of vice and luxury in order to proceed. We used the Ipsos online communities to get at the principal question of what is a vice. And I'll note that those who associate vice with Miami are clearly my people. And for those too young to remember, Miami Vice was a hit TV show in the 1980s. Many saw vices as harmless, or at least as, quote, something everyone has. There were feelings of guilt in the response too, as well as stronger sentiments like, my vices have a grip on me. Now that we have some contours of a definition, I want to get into the most interesting set of findings in this issue. To do so, however, we need to journey not just into the future, but the past. In the 1930s, the US government ran a huge anti-marijuana campaign, including the now cult classic movie, Reefer Madness, warning of, quote, drug-crazed abandons, and predator men luring young women with the evil weed. I went back to the New York 1930s. I went back to the 1930s, but you can find examples much more recently. Now, things have changed. Cannabis can be bought legally in downtowns, in cities large and small. Every billboard in Western Michigan is for a dispensary, and online sportsbooks have sponsorships with teams. Not long ago, pro sports teams weren't even allowed in Vegas because of the potential for association with gambling. I mean, it didn't take much futuring to imagine what could possibly go wrong. Morals and values can shift. So, what do you do when your luxury brand isn't an indulgence anymore? Or your indulgent product becomes a vice? Or a new market opens up because what once was a vice is now just a thing people do? America has always had a moralistic streak. Everyone would probably draw this line a little differently. If you go back in time, views would be different too. For instance, since this is indulgence, let's talk about sex and babies. For instance, sex can be used to make babies. Many say we need more of those, and we need to juice the total fertility rate, which has fallen for decades. But sex can also happen for other reasons? Are those non-procreation reasons more like an indulgence then? We talked to journalist and author Carter Sherman about this later. But we also asked an AI chatbot that mimics historical figures to answer the question as Anthony Comstock, the late 1800s morality crusader, whose eponymous legislation is back in the news. AI Comstock says, I believe that sex should only be for procreation within marriage. The danger is that if people ignore moral rules about sex, society will become chaotic, he said. I fear it will harm families, encourage crime, and weaken people's character. AI Comstock also said he couldn't imagine in his day something like having sex with an AI, and OpenAI just announced that it's going to let its AI be more adult. Something that would mean that one could self-indulge without corrupting the morals of others. But what if you could substitute the more vicey part of an activity for something that removes the vice? Like, say, high-end non-alcoholic beverages, which we also discuss later. They're another case where the vice part, the actual booze, is removed, but the indulgent experiences and feelings still remain. For this, we asked AI chatbot Frances Willard, a 19th century contemporary of Comstock, who led the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Her response is quite reasonable, that the substitution reduces the chance for harm and therefore seems above board. She does, however, frown on the idea that a couple of college students living in her namesake dorm would brew a beer in her honor and put her face on the labels. Oops, my bad. My point is that these topics have always, to some degree, been political. There have always been tensions rooted in values, and those values can shift, however. The degree to which they are political can be ratcheted up and down. At the moment, they are arguably at an all-time high of polarization. The initial conceit of what the future was a novel question for market researchers. What is something that in 5 or 10 years from now, you'll wish you had a trend line on? Now that we've been doing this for 7 or 8 years, some of those trend lines exist because we started them, and this one in particular is fascinating. In 2018, for WTF Vice, we fielded a study about, quote, consuming, watching, or doing a variety of things in moderation. We asked again about each of these items in August of this year. Each option saw a sizable decrease in people saying it was morally acceptable. That was true for beverages like wine, down 8 percentage points, beer, down 9 points, liquor, down 16 points, and sugary soft drinks, down 17 points. It was true for casino gambling, down 16 points to just 38%, and online gambling, also down 16 points. It was true for cannabis, down 9 points. The drinking categories were all still considered moral by most Americans, but the rest slipped below 50%. So is our morality becoming more puritanical? It's easy to see a virtuous cycle of increasing accessibility and decreasing scorn or shame. But is that what's happening? It's possible that regulation got ahead of public opinion. It's also possible that permissive regulation gave people what they wanted, and now they're not so sure, and the pendulum is swinging back. Pivoting over to the luxury side of things, let's go back to the online communities. Expensive can be an indicator of luxury or a barrier to indulgence. In 2022, most Americans, 58%, said they planned for large purchases. Now that's up to 3 in 4, as an increasing number say that the overall economy today, as well as where the economy is headed, impacts their purchasing. One sentiment is summed up by a participant thusly. One recurring sentiment is summed up by a participant thusly. It offers a deep sense of satisfaction. That seemed true for both people who indulged in luxury and those who clearly longed for but couldn't. Some, however, say they prefer to focus on things and aren't out to impress people. The big word in the cloud, expensive, cuts 2 ways. Having the freedom to indulge can be a luxury in itself. Having the freedom to make choices about what to indulge in or not can be too. And part of that choice is economic. There's some tension around whether people think luxury should be accessible for all, 65%, or not, 35%. In WTF American Dream, we talked about how while most Gen Zs want to own a home, they see it as less a component of the dream than previous generations, with freedom being much more important. At the time, we discussed how there's an aspiration gap that might lead to this downplaying. Why dream about something you can't achieve? And here we see that 66% consider homeownership an actual luxury, not just a thing everybody does. That's a sea change. Because as we talk about Lux and Vice, let's also remember half of Americans don't have any money left over once they pay their bills. Yes, half of Americans live in a zero-sum economy. 76% consider fine dining a luxury or splurge. When it comes to tech, many teens in the teen online community saw tech, especially social media, as a vice. We have a world that is increasingly automated, and items and products that used to be considered a luxury due to craftsmanship, required to make them, can now be mass-produced. Tech is both an enabler of dupe culture, also where AI is leading to better detection of dupes. And tech is a category itself that is benefiting from its own status as a luxury item. One of the categories we are most likely to splurge on, according to the Ipsos Consumer Tracker. Also today, the human touch itself becomes a luxury. Handmade, premium. Human white glove customer service, premium. A place to connect with humans and share a boozy or not beverage in person, premium. An experience that happens in reality, not mediated by screens, premium. Which brings us back to this core question. At what point is an indulgence a luxury, and at what point does it become a vice? I mean, you can buy weed in designer dispensaries next to the local Chipotle and downstairs from your gym. This much is true. People will continue to indulge. How extravagant those indulgences are, and whether they're viewed more as luxuries or vices will ebb and flow with the economy and with changes in technology and our values. Several questions will require further discussion and ongoing research. What role will AI play in the balance between dupe culture, infinite customization, and the further premiumization of the human touch? How will the norms, values, regulations change around what is an indulgence, what is a vice, and again, what is a thing we just do now? As standards of living increase, will personalization and luxury become ever more over the top? Where do wellness and indulgence intersect? If you saw our last issue, and where do they diverge? If sex is more polarizing than ever, is it still working for marketing and media? Or will it not be worth the risk? I appreciate you indulging what the future with the biggest luxury of all, your time and attention. So let's dive in. As always, we have an awesome panel. We have David Klingbeil, professor of luxury marketing at New York University, Sojourner Judson, founder and CEO of Organic Design, Maggie Frère-Jean Tattinger, co-founder of French Bloom, Eric Zitzowitz, professor of economics at Dartmouth College, and Carter Sherman, a journalist and author of a book called The Second Coming. But we want to start with the shifts that we see that show us that something might be changing. For that, we turn to Ipsos Strategy 3 and my colleague, Jamila Amaru. She takes us from now, where discipline-driven to desire-led. And the return to normalcy movement has come to a tipping point where consumers are indulging more freely, spending on what brings them immediate joy, while still feeling the ongoing pressure to maintain financial discipline. This creates a tension between living in the moment and lingering responsibly to prepare wisely for the future. Next, she sees a shift from occasional treats to everyday escapes. As indulgence becomes more emotionally driven, people are weaving it into daily routines for comfort and control. What feels extravagant now, like on-demand, personalized chefs, or even designer home fragrance systems, may soon become the new standard for everyday indulgences. And in the future, she shows us a shift from status symbols to mindful indulgences. Looking ahead, indulgence will center on hyper-personalized luxury experiences. Customers will invest in curated wellness, travel, and retail experiences, and social rituals, from hosting quarterly ultra-indulgent gatherings to mood-enhancing drinks, tailored to evoke specific emotions. Indulgence will become a tool for renewal, not just escape from current demands. We're going to start with the luxury side of things. The luxury business is dividing as consumers reject traditional exclusivity for dupes, secondhand, and non-luxury alternatives better serve their needs. Shoppers increasingly want authentic experiences and acceptable entry points, so brands must adapt. Luxury marketing expert David Klingbeil thinks artificial intelligence offers an ally. He analyzed data for luxury brands at Google before teaching at NYU, and founding Submarine AI. He thinks that luxury's deeply human craftsmanship and stories will give brands a unique edge as AI makes authenticity precious. If you've read WTF in the past, we've been talking about this idea of the human touch as a luxury good for quite some time in a number of contexts, including live events versus virtual. That applies both to the goods themselves, things that are made by hand or places that have personal relationships, but it also applies to the experience of buying luxury. Here's what Klingbeil told managing editor Kate MacArthur.
The customer base of luxury is getting younger and more feminine. It's important to make sure that even though this younger consumer is going to probably be at a much lower price point, they still get an amazing experience that's going to make them want to be a client of the luxury brand in the future. One thing that the younger consumer are specifically sensitive to is the experience. What they value in luxury is not just the products. Of course, the product has to be of superior quality, has to be beautiful, very creative and unique, but also it's an experience. When they go to a store, they want to live an experience. They want to be welcome in a specific way. They want to have a good reason to go to the store, meaning that if it's only to discover the product and know the price, they can go online. They know how to search. They can use ChatGPT. They can use Google. They can check the e-commerce website or hear from their favorite influencers. But if they decide to go to the store, there must be a reason. So the experience must be good. And they're very sensitive to packaging. If you look on TikTok, TikTok is full of unboxing experiences. So people who share their experiences of opening the box, sometimes they create those videos called ASMR that highlight the sensory experience of opening a packaging. So what noise that it makes, what's the smell, what are the textures, how does it feel to get the product. So that's something that's much more true for younger consumers.
Klingbeil spoke of generational differences. We see those in the data too. Older Americans may hold more spending power than younger ones, but in the age of the Gen Z Henrys, high earners not rich yet, and Dinks, dual income, no kids, age and tax brackets exert a strong influence on the way people shop. Those generational differences might shift over time, says Jesse Peretz, Vice President of Global Influentials for Ipsos. He says Gen Z's growing economic influence has clear implications for brands. Those seeking broad appeal should keep tabs on the luxuries that all ages care about. Small indulgences. Those catering to Gen Zers, on the other hand, should note that the youngest shoppers, at least for the time being, put a premium on experiential luxury and brands that reflect their values. Those profiles are likely to change. The cohort's values may persist, while attitudes based on life stage might recede as Gen Zers age into their careers and families. To tease out those shifts, brand leaders and marketers must avoid vibes-based narratives and seek out rigorous data that account for the social and economic complexity of generational values and behaviors. Perhaps the most personal luxury is event planning. Luxury celebrations among America's ultra-wealthy are shifting from quantity-driven excess toward curated multi-day experiences. While wedding budgets can reach 6 to 7 figures, event hosts now prioritize meaningful, personalized moments over traditional status displays. Sojourner Judson, founder and CEO of ultra-luxury event planning firm Organic Design, sees these expectations cascading beyond her high-net-worth clients to reshape mainstream social events, from elaborate birthday parties to extravagant prom sends-offs. Again, the theme of experiences comes into play. Humans gathering are one level of experience just in themselves. But for an event like a wedding or celebration, and for the affluent, it has to be a memorable and, let's face it, grammable experience. But with luxury and the affluent diversifying with the rest of the population, that's going to be different for everyone, and brands need a high degree of cultural fluency to make not just an experience, but the right experience. One filled with personal touches and intentions. Here's an example she gave Kate.
It's really about the intentionality, and then it's very personalized. At least for us, when it comes to weddings, every couple really wants the guests to feel like they are learning a little bit more about the couple. We were just in Montana. Of course, it was a Western feel. We were at Yellowstone Club. And from the very beginning, the bride was telling me she loves cowboy black tie concept. And while there are plenty of weddings that have been held at that same venue that didn't have the same budget or spend, things like a custom hat bar, which sounds very simple. But if you think about someone who's making hats, branding them, and for each guest to get their own, then if hats are anywhere from $150 and up times 100 plus guests, that's just one moment that they had at their welcome party. That wasn't even a wedding. So it becomes more about these pieces that are very personalized. So certainly their spend puts them in the category of luxury, ultra luxury, but they were very intentional. It wasn't opulent. It wasn't, you come in, it wasn't over the top in terms of the aesthetic. It was very balanced and beautiful, but they were very intentional about where they put that money.
Dialing in more on the cultural fluency, from fine dining and travel to couture and jewelry, U.S. luxury brands can fuel business by engaging growth audiences. Black, Hispanic, and Asian American shoppers who represent the fastest growing U.S. segments, says Janelle James, who leads the cultural intelligence practice at Ipsos. Though historically underserved, these audiences are increasing in influence and are overrepresented in younger generations. Growth audiences are dynamic, from celebrities and creators like Beyoncé and Becca Bloom to more affluent consumers flexing their spending power. They are setting trends, shaping culture and markets, and embracing the brands that share their values. The 2025 Met Gala, Superfine Tailoring Black Style, presents compelling evidence. Celebrating Black culture and contributions, they raised record funds, broke streaming precedents, and garnered over $500 million in earned media. Cultural relevance drives commercial success. However, initiatives must be informed, intentional, and inclusive, and certainly avoid missteps driven by bias. Authenticity and empathy are essential when ensuring growth audiences feel uniquely cared for at every touchpoint. Somewhere between luxe and vice lies the new but growing world of high-end non-alcoholic spirits. It removes some of the vice, as we talked about with AI Francis Willard, but does it leave all of the luxe? Enter Maggie Freragin-Tattinger, a former international director of the Michelin Guide, Oscars of the fine dining world, and now a zero-alcohol sparkling winemaker. Why did she make the pivot? She became pregnant. In 2019, while carrying twins, she saw a huge opportunity when she felt excluded from social events because of the lack of premium non-alcoholic options. Together with her champagne-making husband and her other co-founder, Constance Jablonski, they launched French Bloom, attracting LVMH's first strategic investment in the now fast-growing non-alcoholic space. Tattinger acknowledged a key point in the discussion of non-alcoholic. Most aren't giving up alcohol entirely. They're backing away from this vice for a variety of reasons, including a shifting sense of wellness we talked about in our previous WTF on that topic. But even backing away slightly represents a noticeable and important consumer shift that impacts not just beverage, but other areas of the luxe and vice worlds, including those weddings we were just talking about. One big benefit, she says, is that you don't have to tie alcohol to being social and having those experiences. Here's what she told Kate.
The most powerful trend we're seeing, it's flexibility. And for us, consumers aren't saying no to alcohol. They're saying not always, not every time. For us, really, it's about moderation. But when you go between a glass of champagne and a glass of French Bloom, you're able to do so without taking a step down with regards to quality. And you're also able to have that similar experience as everybody else around the table. Our teams and our consumers are what we think is the future. We're still drinking wine. Wine will exist for the next 7 centuries. We are drinking higher quality wine. There's a premiumization in the quality of wines we're drinking, and we're just drinking a little bit less. So we're there for that moment when perhaps you want to stop with the consumption of alcohol in the same evening, or maybe you want to take a night off. In the past, a night off alcohol for a lot of us, including me, 10 years ago, was Netflix and chill. It was like, I'm staying in. But now we realize that I can still go out and have a great time. And especially if there's non-alcoholic options, it allows me to feel like I'm a part of the moment and not succumb to that glass of wine that I don't really want.
Understanding where and when those backing away moments happen and why will be key. From Gen Zers who choose mocktails at brunch but tequila shots at happy hour, to commuters who drink instant coffee during the work week but a pour over on Sundays, the choices shoppers make are often contextual. Brands underestimate this at their own risk, especially when it comes to impulse purchase and indulgences, says Philip Ryan, managing partner of Ipsos US Strategy 3 practice. If brands stick to their static consumer profiles that neglect how different moods and moments influence individual shoppers, then they risk losing sight of how their audiences act at scale. New AI tools, coupled with old-fashioned human ingenuity, make it possible for brands to spot these patterns and identify growth opportunities early, rather than wait for sales data to see the choices that consumers make after the fact. This can help companies innovate and roll out products and services to deliver what people want when they want it. Across sectors, the brands that succeed in new categories and occasions will be the ones that stop shouting through a megaphone and start designing flexibility into their brand experiences, ones that reflect the complexity of their customers' lives. Okay, time to pivot over more fully to Vice. Though when it comes to betting and prediction markets, it feels like a lot of the Vice has gone out of it. No longer do you need a shadowy bookie and his inevitable kneecapping friends. Now sportsbook platforms are sponsoring actual sports broadcasts. Some of the Vices seems to be going out of it. Traditional betting, where the people bet against a central entity, the house, has been legalized in many states. And prediction markets, where people bet against each other instead of the house, on everything from event contracts, from sports to weather to elections, also seem to be operating a more solid legal footing these days after a series of court cases. That could change, says Erit Zitzowitz, an economics professor who studies these behaviors, if the political winds blow in a different direction in the future. In the meantime, who takes part in these bets, and what do they say about the future of risk as an indulgence? Zitzowitz said something that stuck with me, that the reason prediction markets and sports betting platforms exist as a viable business is that people are really bad at predicting things. If we were good at it, no one could make any money. That's some really interesting behavioral science lessons here. And part of it ties into what is starting to look like a generational shift among young men looking to make passive income and make it quickly, which we talked about a bit in WTF American Dream. Here's what Zitzowitz told me.
Men are more overconfident, I think people have found it in lots of different contexts, including finance contexts. You have to be a little bit overconfident to trade in a market that's inherently zero-sum and then also charge you fees, right? Because you know that the average investor is going to lose money in a market like that because the house is going to get its take. So overconfidence is actually what makes these markets go to some extent. I mean, people might have other trading motives. They might be willing to lose money on the average because it's fun. One reason why you might end up being overconfident is you're trying to figure out how to get rich quick, for lack of a better word. So you're constantly on the lookout and very willing to update when the data is positive on whether this is going to really make me rich or not. Whether it's a new phenomenon or whether this has always been what young men do, like I am at least open to the idea that maybe this is just kind of what you do when you're young and society expects you, or you have a much better time in society if you have money.
Finally, one place sex matters is the birth rate. Another is in marketing. Sex is the oldest and most common indulgence, yet the politicization of topics surrounding it is a swinging pendulum. Today, sex and related topics in family planning, relationships, gender roles, and sexuality are center in the culture wars. How comfortable people are with sex in their lives affects how comfortable they are having it depicted in media and marketing. Carter Sherman covers these topics for The Guardian, and in The Second Coming, Sex and the Next Generation's Fight Over Its Future. There's been a lot of talk about how younger folks aren't having the same in-person and physical relationships as they used to. People are getting married and having kids later. We know this. But imagine growing up in today. The polarization around vice and whether things are shifting more vicey or less vicey, and how that's playing out in the world is oddly political. Sherman and I talked about how young people today understand, as she puts it, that they are existing in a political ecosystem. In a media world where the phrase sex sells has been one of the few long-standing truisms, that can have a big impact. Here's what she told me.
At the same time that young people have these much more sexually progressive views, they do seem to be less interested in sex in the media. There are a number of surveys that I'm sure you're aware of that showed that young people are less interested in seeing sexual storylines in TV shows or movies that they consume. I do think that the increased awareness around power dynamics and sexuality can lead to a more criticism of sex and marketing. Just look at the Sydney Sweeney ad. I think that was intended to be like fun and sexual, and it had some interesting language to go along with that, but people did not even appreciate the sexual elements of it. If your goal is to create discourse and hope that all boats rise, then sex might help you do that. If your goal is to straightforwardly sell a product without potentially becoming controversial, then I think this generation is very primed to turn any possible piece of marketing into the discourse. And that could subvert your aims.
And now we turn to the tensions. Every issue, we take these forced choice questions and we plot them against each other to think about potential futures. So in this tension, we're looking at the aspirational value that has long been the primary driver for consumer desire and cachet. Without it, luxury brands face a precarious future. People are fairly split on their desire for them. Another tension is whether AI will make it possible to tell fake goods from real. 73% think so. This compounds the danger of declining aspiration if people don't care if products are fake because luxury is no longer seen as a symbol of personal aspiration or success. That is the warning shot scenario for the luxury sector. Though we could easily land elsewhere. Say luxury becomes easier to get, yet more difficult to authenticate. Or say AI got stronger at proving authenticity, but luxury feels too common and loses its magic. Public opinion could just as easily drop to the bottom two quadrants as a result. If the experts in this issue show us anything, it's that luxury must focus on its relevance in order to thrive in the future. And in the future, there are a lot of questions for different sectors. We'll touch on a couple of them here, but the rest are in the full issue at future.ipsos.com. But for retail, how should brands adjust their offerings to remain aspirational if spending patterns shift during economic downturns when indulgence becomes accessible only to the ultra-wealthy? How can brands reduce their exposure if products are being exploited in stunts designed to manipulate events for profit in prediction markets? And how can advertisers relate to younger generations who might be less interested in traditional sexual narratives? As always, with What the Future, if you go to future.ipsos.com, you can download the full issue with the full Q&As with all of these great experts. But you can also download the full tabs from our Future of Indulgence survey. There are also links to all the previous issues, all the previous webinars. At this point, I want to thank you all for coming out. When you stop, give yourself a little bit of time to think about something other than the next fiscal quarter, even if that's just coming to a webinar like this, or doing a full Trends and Foresight exercise, which I will always recommend as a great way to prepare for these plausible futures. But when you stop and think about your customers and where they're going to be in 3 or 5 or 10 years and what that world is going to look like, when you give yourself space to think about the possible tomorrows, you're going to ask better questions and do better research today. So that's it for the Future of Indulgence. We'll be back next month with the future of family as our final issue for 2025. As always, my name is Matt Carmichael. I'm the editor of WTF. Thanks for your time, and we'll see you in the future.